Mangrove Health Tool is something that we are going to co-design, not just between us, but also bring in all the experts.
So earths, lands, waters, and biodiversity. And the stock of those assets leads to flows of benefits to people. So in mangroves, that includes things like carbon storage and sequestration.
Think about planting 110,000 mangrove saplings, and you think that will be done. But unfortunately, the survival rates were abysmally low because you've got ash from the thermal plants nearby, you've got toxic waste and effluents.
Waste that is lined along our coast, it actually provides for a really nutrient-rich soil for mangroves to grow. And we've actually seen growth that is happening almost within communities.
Thank you so much, Mangrove, for that wonderful introduction, for the leadership of this coalition and this work, and the vision for the continuum of conscious, climate-friendly possibilities that can animate all of our thinking. It's such an exciting moment indeed to have the Mangrove Coalition, these wonderful partners across various geographies that can there. This work is going to be anchored by the Mangrove Foundation, and hopefully building new norms and new narratives for work on this wondrous ecosystem that sits at the edge of land and sea. There's a beautiful quote from the Hungry Tide, Amitabh Ghosh, one of our panelists, Suresh Babu, was just in the Sundarbans where that book was set. And Amitabh Ghosh writes, "There are no borders here to divide fresh water from salt, river from sea. When the tides create new land, overnight mangroves begin to gestate. And if the conditions are right, they can spread so fast as to cover a new island within a few short years. A mangrove forest is a universe unto itself, utterly like other woodlands or jungles." So to many of us in this auditorium today, the intrinsic case for protection may be quite clear. But we need to move beyond that. As Nairika has said, and as Mr. Sukhdev mentioned earlier this morning, how do we move into a framework of national capital? How do we think about land use and urban planning accordingly, especially in an era of climate change? How do we also move past a fortress style of conservation, where one has a pristine, intact ecosystem in there and communities elsewhere? How do we instead think about community stewardship-based solutions? And finally, when assessing the health of our ecosystems, how can we be more inclusive to citizens of varied backgrounds? I think in the last few years in particular, we can leverage the growing wonder and connection to nature of citizens from quite varied backgrounds, bird-watching communities, to fisher folks, all basically seen either through their binoculars or in their nets what could be data points about the health of our ecosystems. And finally, how do we think about the interconnections of these mangroves with other coastal ecosystems, with tidal marshes, seagrass meadows, tidal flats, oyster beds, our reef side, and so on. So before we dive into some of the specifics in terms of mangroves, where we are in this beautiful part of Bombay and in Chennai, let's turn to Jen Howard to get an overview of where we are in terms of mangroves globally. As you said several times in our conversations over the last year, mangroves are having a bit of a moment, and Conservation International has anchored a lot of that work through the Global Mangrove Alliance, Mangrove Breakthrough, and the Mangrove Alliance for Climate. So tell us a little bit more about that global movement for the species ecosystem.
Sure. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to sit on this panel. I think mangroves are for sure have the golden right panel. I think that's a combination of the climate crisis we find ourselves in, as well as the biodiversity crisis. And we're looking for those solutions that provide the greatest amount of impact in the smallest amount of space for biodiversity, for people, and for climate mitigation and adaptation. And we're looking across all of those different characteristics to be able to better than a bare road ecosystem. We're talking about the climate impacts that are going to really be harmful to people, things like sea level rise, storm surge, loss of food security. Mangroves provide all of protection from all of these things. They can keep pace with sea level rise. They can provide a free source of high quality protein to local communities And as we know, the coastal populations are going to continue to expand and grow. And so really protecting this coastal ecosystem for the protection of those vulnerable communities is of critical importance. And I really, really loved the talk from the architect about how we build with nature. I think that that's especially true when we're talking about coastal system. So I think all of those aspects have really meant that the global community looking to achieve global targets, sustainable development goals, and biodiversity targets have seen what mangroves and other coastal ecosystems can do to meet those targets and are really starting to focus in on them. Now, this is great news. Most of us, or some of us in this room, are very excited. So we've been studying these ecosystems for a long time, both in their ecosystem service value, but also in their potential financial value, particularly through the carbon market, which is something that I focus on. But groups like the Global Mangrove Alliance, which is a group of NGOs working globally. There's about 87 NGOs, 12 chapters around the world that are nationally focused, are really trying to drive on-the-ground effort, communication, fundraising, and knowledge sharing in a way that's going to be really meaningful towards halting loss, doubling the protection, and restoring half of all mangroves by 2030. Those targets are science-based, based off of mapping from the 1990s through to today. That ability to add that scientific component to our target was what made the Mangrove Breakthrough take notice. The Mangrove Breakthrough was part of the UNFCCC Climate Champions to really mobilize the world around topics that they thought had a breakthrough component that was going to have huge international impact. So the Global Mangrove Alliance, along with the Mangrove Breakthrough and the Mangrove Alliance for Climate, which is led by the UAE in Indonesia, though the government of India has also signed on to that alliance, have all come together to do something bigger than we ever have done on our own. And we're seeing a lot of interest. We're building a fundraising target where we're going to try to sustainably mobilize $4 billion for mangrove conservation and restoration globally. We have a pipeline of projects all around the world in these knowledge hubs in these 12 to 14 different countries. It's an amazing network that I think is really poised to do something fantastic. And, you know, the moment is now, as we're saying, it's a big moment. It's not going to last forever, and if we don't do the most we can to make this right now, the moment will pass and it will have been sad. But I'm very, very hopeful that we're going to be able to achieve something amazing in the very near future.
Thanks so much, Jen. Moving from some of the high-level global dockets to the ground realities and where we are today, Lubaida, can I turn to you to understand a little bit about what things look like in terms of both challenges and opportunities, and especially if we think about in a dense city like Bombay with so many competing land uses, how the communities feature in all of this?
And sorry, I'm really excited to be part of this coalition. I think in terms of the opportunities, like at least as WRI, we've only looked at mangrove and other natural ecosystems from a very sort of high vantage point, 5,000 feet above the ground, you know, trying to kind of understand how the coastline has changed, sedimentation, accretion, what is sort of the carbon sequestration potential that these ecosystems bring. So I think now really with this opportunity, being able to get into these forests and understand how the forest is so sort of diverse across the coast and how different edges provide sort of different opportunities. I mean, the field work that we did a couple of weeks ago, where we went and actually saw some of these sites,
to see that there are different relationships, right? And there are actually amazing livelihoods being facilitated in the healthier mangrove areas, which become, you know, a really sort of showcase-worthy best practices to actually bring to the table as relationships that can be strengthened in communities along the coast. But the challenges, of course, are a mountain of them, right? In the urban areas, and you know, this sort of builds on the point you were making, the quote from the Sundarbans, that it is not as that yes, of course, mangrove ecosystems grow very rapidly, and we're seeing that in Mumbai as well, right? With the amount of you know, waste that is lying along our coast, it actually provides for a really nutrient-rich soil for mangroves to grow. And we've actually seen growth that's happening almost within communities. So there is sort of a growth of the mangroves into settlements, and that has a huge political dimension. So while, you know, it is something to celebrate, it is also something to understand what that means, where because we have a 50-meter buffer line, which is considered an ecologically sensitive area which you can't really build. And if your house really falls within the 50-meter buffer zone, or it's soon coming close, there is a huge fear that is also kind of set in communities. And unfortunately, some of the most poor and vulnerable communities live along these ecosystems. So what are some of these, what is the kind of, you know, field work and policy work that we need to really do to understand what the regulatory opportunities are? How can we have this kind of, you know, 5,000 feet above the ground view of caring for these ecosystems, really building thriving mangrove ecosystems and others in the city, at the same time ensure that we aren't really, you know, turning a blind eye against the kinds of socio-political linkages in these communities. Waste is actually one of the biggest kind of challenges to deal with, right? If you're looking at like the right ecologically sensitive ways to restore this land, we will have to deal with our waste problem. But the waste problem is not local to that place. It really is a bigger problem across the city. And so how can we really think about managing waste really at home much better, so that it doesn't end up in our ecosystems? And this is not only kind of local to the mangrove ecosystem. It's, you see our nalas, our rivers, our coastline, our sea, it's all kind of, you know, our waste that's landing up there. So I think that is one of the biggest challenges. But secondly, it's the sort of these boundaries, right? And I'll just give one example to kind of, you know, draw attention to what the politics of the place looks like. As part of our earlier project on cleaning in vulnerable neighborhoods, you know, we wanted to actually go to some of the most heat-prone areas, heat-stressed communities of Mumbai, which is essentially informal settlements. And we landed up in the NH ward. And looked at many different kinds of opportunities for greening. One of this was a plot that actually is on the DP, marked as a recreational ground, a playground. It's very close to a new BMC school that's come up in the ward. And BMC is very keen on developing this as a shaded public ground for the school. But the plot actually now sits within the 50-meter buffer. So there is then a claim of the Mangroves department to also kind of be green. Now both these departments have very well-intentioned targets, right, to increase the green cover, very different nature of green cover in the city. And how does that sort of the people, nature, climate tension really, you know, actually play out in local plots? What is that sort of politics that can be negotiated? That is actually what is sort of exciting about this project and something when creating the products.
Thanks so much, Shivan. Can we turn to you, Shri, to get a perspective from Chennai? MSSRF has been working in and around Chennai, Tamil Nadu for several decades now. What do things look like on the ground in terms of the health and vibrance of mangrove ecosystems and the communities that depend on them?
Sure. First, thanks for having me here, and I'm excited to be part of the trials and MSSRF. I'd like to set the context a little bit for Chennai, in case everyone knows there was from Mumbai. So Chennai would be typically a tale of two zones.
One is the north and south. And north typically is the older neighborhoods, highly dense. Again, very less planning because there was not much scope for doing that. It's also very highly industrialized. And from income levels, they're significantly lower than what the south is. South is the one which you're more familiar with in the media with IT corridors and IT parks and well-planned areas. So in this backdrop, you've got three mangrove ecosystems. The largest one, ironically, is in the north, and it's the Ennore Creek system, which is about 8,000 hectares, and approximately about 400, or half of that is 400 hectares of just mangrove forests. Very, very critical ecosystem in the backdrop of effluents, industrial waste, and 4,000 fishers who rely on that ecosystem for their neighborhood, for their livelihoods, and that's diminishing. So, it sometimes takes an adverse event to actually get sensitized to this fact about how fragile that ecosystem is. In 2017 and in 2022, we've had 2 oil spills in that area, which then got everyone's interest into conservation of that fragile ecosystem. So again, what we've done over there in terms of past practices and some of the challenges was that you go piecemeal. So you think about planting 110,000 mangrove saplings, and you think that will be done. But unfortunately, the survival rates were abysmally low because you've got ash from the thermal plants nearby, you've got toxic waste and effluents. So it's just not viable at all. In fact, it was a project that didn't succeed. So critically over here, I think from an opportunity and what we need to do forward is using an interdisciplinary, sectoral, and even interdepartmental approach with community centricity, because the communities, the 4,000 fishers, were the actual custodians of that ecosystem over hundreds of years. So they know what it takes to sustain and keep that ecosystem going. But those kind of participatory approaches with community-centric, thinking is absolutely required. I think the light at the end of the day is, I think we've got the Chennai River Restoration Trust, which has now looked at all of this and come up with a comprehensive plan of which we are a thought knowledge partner as well. But looking at it more holistically from urban waste, pollution with the departments of Ministry of Pollution, the forest departments, the water, sanitation, hygiene departments, all coming together with the communities to actually look at a comprehensive plan to do that. It's at the very nascent stages, but there's more with this large participatory approach with many more stakeholders for us to see some good successes and good outcomes, which will be measured and therefore the impact every year to see whether we are actually moving the needle on making those changes. So now, very similar to what you've seen in Mumbai, but I think one of the big challenges is the fact that this has already been a lot of damage done with a lot of erosion of that landscape. Thank you, Shivi. You've teed up Suresh very well for his perspective. Suresh, you've been working on rivers and wetlands now for several decades. What are you seeing as different in terms of the objectives of the Mangrove Coalition? And tell us a little bit more about the ecosystem health component which WWF is within the year.
Thanks, sir. Very excited because it's kind of a complementary coalition, I would say. We are working in our own spaces, someone working on biodiversity, someone working on land use, someone working with fishers. So we are excited because we are part of a larger network who can bring a complementarities and brings and change to other landscapes that we are working as. We are excited at WWF India because we are now not looking at mangroves as mangroves idea. It's a landscape. Mumbai, we cannot be talking about mangrove protection without talking about Ullas River. We cannot talk about mangroves without talking about the satellite wetlands. I think that's exciting for us, and probably I would say in my career over the last decade and 2 decades and a half, I have not seen a project being pro-creative like this. So that's number one. Number two, Dr. Sukhdev in the morning, you mentioned about measuring. Now, always we've been focusing on health of mangroves. We have been talking about it, but we will go there and look at species diversity, we will look at water quality, etc. We will never look at how the upstream ecosystems are functioning. And we are extremely excited that we are able to kind of build on the initiative of the Ministry of Environment and Forest 2 years back. Ministry of Environment and Forest, particularly the Wetlands Division, they said that, okay, let's understand the wetlands a little bit more. Degraded, loss of wetlands is fine, but how do we look at it? And so a night indicator health index was created, and we are going to try this out for the mangroves in Mumbai and also in Chennai to look at how various ecosystems are in terms of their health indicators. Are their associated ecosystem healthy? If they are not, then mangroves cannot be healthy as well. So you talked about sedimentation and pollution. Okay, where is the freshwater flow? Where is the freshwater flow that is supposed to bring in sediments? And is the sedimentation rates increasing? Yes, sedimentation rates are increasing. Is it organic sediments that's coming in which is not required? We don't know. So several of those things. So this inquiry and the tool, thanks for prompting on that, the Mangrove Health tool is something that we are going to co-design, not just between us, but also bringing on the experts who understand river, wetland and mangrove ecosystems and try and create, feel validated and see if that can be applied to other cities, coastal cities which has mangroves. So that's something that we are going to do significantly well. In terms of how it translates into citizen science, that's again, we have thought about that and we want to kind of see how citizens can be brought in. It's not the people who are dependent on the mangroves alone. We see an opportunity for people who are contributing upstream for ecosystem degradation as well to be part of this journey, and that's the upstream downstream connect. That's a community ecosystem connect, community mangrove connect that we are trying to research. So that's going to be the number 2 pillar that we are going to get citizen science and how participation in case-wise can happen. The last one, Aaron, we've been talking about it. There is, for instance, the Thanekri, the flamingo sanctuary. It's a Ramsar site. So we're very proud about it being a Ramsar site. The management plan talks about integrated management and etc. But do we have enough in that management plan to kind of address all the threats that we are seeing in terms of flows, in terms of quality? Yes, pollution is mentioned, but are there other issues that need to be looked at? Are there citizens' roles that are defined, how they can contribute in this? So we are going to kind of look into that aspects as well and work closely with the stakeholders who are engaged in both the cities for research, wetland management and mangrove management as well. Once again, the coalition is a great platform that we are looking at, and I require the vision is also that we build this as a knowledge town for other cities to kind of pick on this model and kind of replicate. So it's not the story about Mumbai and Chennai, but also for all the cities which are growing along the coastal cities with mangroves as well.
Thank you, Suresh. Now, turning to a different and important pillar that you mentioned at the beginning of our work in terms of national capital, can you explain to our friends here today, what does national capital mean? How can that offer us a new way of thinking about these maritime ecosystems?
Suta did a great job telling us all what capital is this morning. But most simply, it's the stock of assets that are provided by natural systems, so birds, lands, waters, and biodiversity. And the stock of those assets leads to flows of the benefits to people. So in mangroves, that includes things like storage and sequestration. It includes recreational opportunity. It includes protection from increasing coastal storms, sea level rise, urban cooling. Also, inspiration. I saw some gorgeous swirly art out there in the Marches Collective. It's an inspiration for artists and a place for education. So many different ecosystem services flow from mangroves to people. And this concept of natural capital and the inclusive wealth framing of thinking about all forms of capital really helps us kind of flip the narrative from economic development being bad for nature to really understanding that healthy economies are fully dependent on healthy, functioning ecosystems. And mangroves are really a part of that. So what the natural capital approach does is it really helps us make the invisible visible, or maybe the unconscious conscious. It helps us to articulate the many diverse ways that ecosystems sustain and fulfill human life. And it's not just an idea. We can take these stories. It's not just an idea. We can take these stories of benefits that are provided by mangroves to people and by other ecosystems as well, and we can use mathematical models and maps and understanding of the ways in which people interact with ecosystems to measure, map, and value all of those different benefits, and to use that granular understanding to inform conservation and restoration decisions that have better outcomes for both people and nature. And it's also really important to involve the communities, as we've been talking about, to not just come with a vision for what are the services that matter, but to really listen to people about what are the ways in which they use mangroves and how enhancing mangroves might enhance the lives of people who depend on them, and in particular to pay most attention to the vulnerable people who tend not to have the built substitutes for the services that are provided by mangroves.
Can everyone hear me? So weaving these multiple strands together back to the global conversation, Jen, how are you seeing the Indian mangrove story as particularly important, and what are you seeing as some of the opportunities in terms of how these global initiatives have inspired action and ambition being raised in various country chapters, and some of those country-specific case studies going back into the global platforms?
Sure. So, on the first part, the importance of the Indian context when we're talking about mangroves globally. Well, obviously, India is one of the most important mangrove countries in the world. The amount of mangrove that you have here is substantial. And the way that it's being managed is interesting, and I think there are some lessons to learn for other countries there as well. I think that one of the struggles, though, that I see is, in the last, this is only my third time here in maybe 2 years, and so one, I haven't gotten to see or experience or meet nearly enough of the experts and the people that are doing the work here. But I also find that we're not seeing Indian experts put on stage in the way that they should at these big international conferences. And I think that there's a real loss for not having that prominence. And I think that, things like some of these big global initiatives, one of the things that they can do is try to start putting India and India's experts getting the case stories and the knowledge more up front, because we're very used to hearing from places like Indonesia, the top mangrove country in the world. There are very good reasons for that. We're used to hearing from sort of small islands because of their importance and relevance in the climate space as well as being highly threatened. But I think that there's a lot of space that still needs to be filled from the countries that have large mangrove areas and are really doing exciting stuff to conserve and protect them. I've met so many scientists here in this country. I'm on now a couple of different WhatsApp chats. They're very active, they're very excited, and they're doing amazing work. And I think that one of the clear things, this is a bit of a shameless plug for me as a steering committee member of the Global Mangrove Alliance, is we need probably not just one, but 2 Indian chapters within the Global Mangrove Alliance. Maybe one on each coast. Maybe we need more than that because the country is so large. But the real benefit I see at the Global Mangrove Alliance is that we do try to connect the global story of what's going on with local action and then provide the feedback the other direction. So all the science, the tools, the communication, the policy briefs that we produce are based on input is provided by and they are approved by our local partners and our local chapter so that we're sure that what gets produced is relevant, that's context specific, and that every chapter can sort of govern and come up with their strategy in the way that is most beneficial to that area. And I think that in this effort to take all these case studies that I'm seeing around this country, really highlight them, I'm trying to do that as best I can, you know, trying to bring some of our partners along so that we can get those stories out. Then using that channel up and down to not only provide knowledge exchange, but hopefully also some funding exchange back and forth, as well as community engagement. And I think once we've started to do that in the Global Mangrove Alliance and the Mangrove Breakthrough and the MAC and the Mangrove Coalition, you know, making sure all these things are connected and really highlighting the role that they play at the different levels, from local all the way to international, making sure they connect and align is really what we're all about. And I think it's just going to take off. And I think the Mangrove Coalition gives a really clear point of connection for that work, because the GMA not only has CI, but also has WRI, it has WWF, it has TNC, it has a lot of universities in it as well. So a lot of the same actors are in all of these alliances. And so I think it just builds on each other here in Detroit, and it's going to be amazing anyway.
Thank you, Jed. Suresh, I'm going to turn to you once again. You mentioned some of the domestic policy tailwinds that we have and the responsibility that we're seeing at the Mangrove Coalition to help fill in those frameworks, help, you know, add more clear indicators or better management protocols. Talk us through some of the range of different mangrove and wetland-related policy ideas we're seeing out there. Clean Credit Program, Ishki Scheme, Mission Amrit Dharohar, that we're seeing at the federal, at the union level.
Thanks, sir. Before we get into the policy part, this is a very interesting time. You know, today morning we had a nature trail in Maharashtra Nature Park. Toddlers coming in there, looking at glitter bugs, common palm, butterflies, cocoons, the fish poison flowers, etc. So there is an increased consciousness that we are seeing. Maybe our curriculum is changing. So what you said about we're not getting enough from India, but I would say that the previous speaker spoke about hope is only for architects. We have hope, we go to architects, but I would say that as conservationists, we also live in hope that things will change. You know, Dr. Sukhdev knows about it. Every 2 years when we publish the Living Planet report, you know, it's going down, but it's this action and these discussions and initiatives which are unsung. We don't know where those initiatives are. Look at the amount of school children in this campus right now. I mean, they're wanting to explore what I can do, what we can contribute individually and collectively. So I would say that, you know, India is going through a very interesting time. The consciousness, particularly in urban peri-urban areas, from our own work and our partners where we are seeing that is increasing. People want to know what can I do. So it's our responsibility to guide them. Number one. Number two, yes. Last couple of years had been really interesting. Government of India announced ISHTI. This is the Mangrove Initiative for Habitat and Transforming Incomes. It's about connecting with people. It talks about different ecosystems of mangroves. It talks about bringing this interdisciplinary approach, etc. Now that's happening at a national level. Funds are being allocated. But I'm also excited for the fact that several states are taking up missions. Okay, the Mangrove mission. You know, we have seen in Tamil Nadu, the coastal mission is there. In West Bengal, I just returned from Sundarbans. The kind of efforts various departments are doing, you know, Sundarbans Affairs Department or the West Bengal Forest Department, to kind of keep mangrove at the forefront and try and work around the conservation regime is very, very encouraging. So I would say that all getting trickled down to the local level is very, very important. One key area and opportunity I would say for the conscious collective is that how do you integrate
mangrove-related actions into sectoral plans. You know, when I'm designing an urban water supply scheme, how do I ensure that the mangrove downstream is not impacted? When I design a pollution control scheme or an STP, I need to ensure that the agency responsible need to kind of, take that into account. So that's kind of what we need to kind of work around. For India, what we hear in Delhi is very, very clear. For GBF, the global biodiversity targets, India is committed to that, and also the Paris Accord. We are saying that mangroves create mitigation capabilities. From that perspective, mangroves becomes very, very important from a policy perspective, and I'm sure that that goes on. Another opportunity for us, government has just released the biodiversity action plan. Just look at the humongous amount of money required per year if we were to implement that. 81,600 crore rupees per year. It's a huge and an uphill ask from a financial investment point of view. So now the question is, what are the financing mechanisms which will ensure that Government of India, private players, public players, blended finance, how do you take that forward? Because that's an area that we need to kind of work together with various agencies. Last point, Aaron, is the National Adaptation Plan. India has already embarked on preparing the National Adaptation Plan. How we as a collective, I'm not just looking at organizations here, but as people who are concerned about mangroves, how can we collate our input around mangroves and associated ecosystems and ensure that it's part of our National Adaptation Plan, which India will showcase going forward as its contribution towards the global role on adaptation. So there are plenty of opportunities, but as Yubaina said, there are challenges as well, but that's where we need more conscious civil society, citizens, and more aware and capable and skilled public servants who are aware of these vulnerabilities. And I think that's the responsibility for us to take on as a collective and work on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Suresh. The piece that you mentioned on adaptation is especially critical for cities like Mumbai and Chennai based on their vulnerability. We know that all those years ago in July 2005, when Mumbai had its most intense and severe floods, that resulted in $1.7 billion in evacuation. If we hold in place current flood protection measures and ecosystem conservation targets, Mumbai could see $6.5 billion of losses each year by the century. So there's a real vulnerability lens as well over here, which in part comes through Lubaina in WRI's work, both with the MCGM, Municipal Corporation of Mumbai, as well as the Maharashtra state government. Tell us a little bit about some of the adaptation priorities that you've been working on with policymakers at the state and city level, and how you're seeing opportunities to engage with them in terms of addressing the vulnerability of us.
So first, even by some of the projects that we're trying to basically break down the goals, right? There are larger aspirations at the city level that we have that are, stated in the plan. But when it comes down to a city that's so completely built, our relationship with a lot of our natural ecosystems, which are some of the biggest buffers, the adaptation buffers that we really need. That relationship is extremely cut off in most cases. I think most of us do not really associate with mangroves or maybe even the coast or the forest as our connection with nature. It's probably, a tree outside the house or a small park or, that. So it's extremely cut off for most people who live in the city. But there are also communities whose relationship is extremely connected with nature. And what are the kind of lessons that we can learn, and more, as we engage in different ecosystems and do more fieldwork, we learn of extremely incredible examples of communities in the arid forest living on freshwater streams. And it's unbelievable because the assumption is that most of us either get water through pipes or tankers to our buildings. But to know that communities that are actually taking care of natural streams are custodians of these ecosystems and are very well invested because that is the only kind of source of water that they have. How do we, sort of use some of these to really, build out from there? the Bengal paradise, right? Because most of the times a lot of the adaptation goals are kind of more helicoptered down. You have certain idea of what resilience means for the entire city, and then you kind of parachute down to how it means to pan out in different places. What would it mean to kind of do a different sort of more bottom-up co-creation of what those goals really mean? And something that we're also really kind of occupied by. I mean, right now some of the work that we're doing around the Methi ecosystem is to think about the idea of a project, an adaptation project in the city. How do you break it up into a million different efforts? Because if you think about a complex ecosystem like Methi that's so heavily polluted, so heavily built out with so many different claims across the coast, how can you turn it into a single project? You're never going to get it right? So how do you create the pathway to break it down in ethical and ecologically sensitive ways into micro projects that can be done right? And what are the policy environments, the financing mechanisms that can allow for this kind of breakdown of practice, right? So I think this is where how and that's more kind of coming from the need for disruption, because there are literally in planning there are like these two ways that we imagine, either a top-down plan or a bottom-up practice. How do you disrupt in ways that then can really catalyze and scale this form of practice to really kind of increase the scale of action? Because the kind of challenges that we're seeing, the vulnerabilities, the needs of adaptation are extremely severe in our cities. So really kind of increasing the pace of getting it right at scale is the need of the hour. So I think other.
Moving from the adaptation story to the other crucial role that mangroves have in climate change mitigation, it's in a way refreshing that it's only towards the end of the panel that we're finally touching upon carbon, but that is a very, very important part of these ecosystems. Srini, tell us a little bit about MSSRF's work with the Tamil Nadu state government on blue carbon.
So,
And if you could also explain what blue carbon is.
yeah, sure. So, for the students here, typically when you look at blue carbon, it's the amount of carbon that's actually stored within cells in the coastal ecosystems, which store and keep the carbon from getting into the atmosphere and causing greenhouse gas emissions, which are heating up the planet, in which you are aware of, which causes all these issues of climate change. So these ecosystems are therefore very, very critical for us to conserve and protect, because while it's an ecosystem benefit, not doing it has significant harmful effects for all of us citizens. So in that context, some of the work, because MSSRF's vision is basically linking science and society for sustainable development. So we are very closely linked with the government, especially because we bring that aspect of participatory approaches with communities, which we are closely linked with, and then bringing the context-specific technologies that are there, science and technologies, which can help this productivity or ecological sustainability in perpetuity without ecological harm, and looking at the social and cultural aspects of social acceptability as well. So we bring that connect. So with the Tamil Nadu government, we work on several, and we don't do it alone, we work with collectives and we work with collaborations like these. But what we've done is, over the period of time, is come up with pilot models which have succeeded, like the joint mangrove management model, the integrated mangrove fisheries farming model, which have been so well accepted by the government with proven successes that has been incorporated in the national mangrove action plans. And now specifically, now back to the point of what you mentioned, Pawan, if it can't be measured, it can't be managed. Well, what we're doing right now on blue carbon is, first and foremost, is what's your baseline? If you're talking about blue carbon, what do you have? So we got into a very large programmatic work with several partners. The first with the state government on this blue carbon initiative using GeoAI and drone imaging to measure the entire carbon sequestration, currently mapping and zoning the entire coast of Tamil Nadu, right from Chennai down to Tuticorin. This is several hundred kilometers. So we're actually mapping the entire and zoning the areas into corals, mangroves, seagrass, tidal salt marshes, because this is where this is going to be our area of play
not only for assessment and baselining, but also for enhancement. And by doing that, you're also going to be getting the assessment overall of the sequestration potential that exists. Moving forward, just next step after that is we're looking at the conservation and restoration. So we finished zoning and mapping, then we look at the threat assessment. What's the threats in each of these areas, and what are the specific interventions that need to be done at a more granular level, because this is disaggregated data. So we're going to be doing that next, which is looking at all the interventions after the threats on looking at alternative fishing habitats for fishermen and what those technologies are, like multi-tropic aquaculture, looking at all artificial coral reefs and whether they're context specific or not. And then how do we conserve and restore seed grasses, which includes the entire value chain, right from production or saplings, and creating those factories for propagation, conservation, and then repatriation of this into greening. So we're doing that as the next extent, but without doing the first zoning and mapping, we wouldn't know what we're trying to do, because we have to baseline what we're trying to achieve. And that's where I guess we're so excited about these coalitions, because we're looking at relevant knowledge partners. Government is upscaling and scaling out partners, and several others to help do this, including all the microfinance, the management, because that involves the livelihoods of fishers, especially women who are extremely marginalized within the fishing community in post-harvest fisheries, and who get more impacted by climate change, get more impacted by these issues of habitat erosion. So that's the entire gamut anyway. So we're excited about it, and that's something else we do.
Thank you, Shri. Finally, I'm going to turn to you, Anne, once again, to understand some of the incredible success stories of the Natural Capital Project at Stanford with a range of different global collaborators. What are some of the ways that the Natural Capital approach and way of thinking has shifted policy regime, and how do you go about capacity building through partnerships in different emerging contexts?
Yeah, thanks. So we wrote a recent report for the Global Environment Facility that summarized about 20 years of work in concert with decision makers in something like 100 engagements around the world. And you can check it out online. It's called Report on Natural Capital Approaches. And then we also recently published a book called Green Growth that Works, where you can read about some of these case studies. I thought I'd just highlight a few. One example is working in Belize, where we worked with the Coastal Zone Management Authority and Institute to create a spatial plan for use of the coastal zone. And basically, fundamentally what they did was try to figure out how to balance sustainable use of the coastal zone without jeopardizing the ecosystems on which that health of that economy depends. And one of the unique ways that's particularly relevant here is we looked at where it made sense to protect and restore mangroves for their NDCs, but in ways that also bring the most co-benefits that matter to the local communities. So there are lots of different ways in which one can connect mapping and value ecosystem services to policy in that one example. Another example is creation of payment for ecosystem service programs, like for example the creation of a water fund in Nairobi, which the Upper Tana watershed provides water for 95% of the population of Nairobi, and also 50% of the hydropower for all of Kenya. But the watershed was degrading, and therefore the water supply and the hydropower were at risk. And we worked with the team there to figure out where you could get the most return on investment for investments in conservation and restoration in the upper reaches of the watershed that would lead to the most benefits downstream. So that's just another example of how these kinds of approaches can inform those decisions. Looks like we're running low on time. So one additional example is calculating gross ecosystem product, which is a metric that can be used alongside of gross domestic product, but that actually measures some of the things that
matter that Pavan Sukta was talking about earlier. So understanding the stocks and flows of those benefits to people. And in China, they're actually using it in, let's see, I wrote it down, 16 different provinces and at lots of other scales, where the success of leaders is being measured by their GDP score, and not just how much stuff are they producing, but what is the sort of more sort of human well-being that can be measured by those ecosystem products. And then in terms of our work here, one thing I'm really excited about is this coalition. And our role is not to do any analyses, but it's rather to do some training in how to apply these natural capital approaches for our collaborators here in India, to use our open source tools and to use some of the lessons learned from all those engagements around the world of how these kinds of ideas can inform different kinds of policy and finance mechanisms, how they can go from sort of an idea to really informing decisions with better outcomes for people and nature. And so I'm really excited about the knowledge exchange. So we're learning a lot from our partners, and hopefully they'll learn from us. Like, for example, we're conducting a training over the next couple of days for some of our partners in the Mangrove Coalition. And I hope that we'll, in the future, be able to tell the story of how this Mangrove Coalition and how India has the potential to really lead the way in making decisions with better outcomes for both people and nature.
Thank you so much. I'm afraid we won't have time for audience questions because we are at the time limit, but it will be a missed opportunity not to share a few calls to action in terms of how folks in the auditorium can be engaged. We have climate investors, industry leaders, folks in the hospitality space, so many students. Would 2 or 3 of you like to share a very, very quick, crisp call to action in terms of how everyday citizens can get involved with work on mangroves and ecosystems?
Let me start and attempt. Because of the sheer number of you is growing, I would say that, again, going back to what Dr. Sukhdev said, measure your footprint, whether it is water, whether it is waste, and try and make a difference. Even if it is 10% for a period of 2 months, 3 months, set a target. How can I reduce my water and waste footprint? It will have a huge impact on the downstream ecosystem, and that's the minimum that you can do.
I would say go visit them. They're beautiful. You have them in your city. And I think along with needing to measure and monitor and provide money to protect them, you also need to appreciate them and love them and really experience the nature that you have in your city.
I'll probably add one, since this is such a beautiful coast city. When you look at your beautiful beaches, start the beach cleanup in your own area. It really helps to pick up the plastics and move, because everything is connected. That piece of plastic that you pick up there would probably save or planted mangroves in your nearby neighborhood. So think about that in everything that you do every day to reduce your carbon footprint in the choices you make every day.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking this wonderful set of collaborators and panelists.
Thank you, panelists, for this insightful session.